everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of A Sip of Knowledge with Marty Duffy, Liz Rhoades, and Lou Bryson. Plus, this week, special guest Steve Bashore, the Director of Historic Trades at Mount Vernon in George Washington's Distillery. Very excited to see this week's show. Before we get started, real quick, my name is Will Hookinga from Savvy.co. Just want to point out a few ways that you can interact with your hosts and their guests throughout the show. So to your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Feel free to react to Marty's jokes throughout the presentation over there in the chat. If you have any questions for Steve or any of our hosts, there's a button at the bottom that says Ask a Question. Just press that button, put your question in down there. I'll be keeping an eye out and relaying those over to your host throughout the presentation. And last but not least, please invite your friends to join us. There's a share button in the top right. You can hit that and share the event on social media. But with that said, Marty, Liz, Lou, I'll turn things over to you now.
Thank you, Will. You are like God's little gift to online chats.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I really wondered where you were going with that one.
I didn't either. It's weird. It's a dark and slippery path when I start. Hi, everyone. Martin Duffy here. I'm a long-time master of whiskey, defrocked. 14 years as a Diageo master of whiskey. And I, what else did I do? 18 glorious months as National Brand Ambassador for Benedictine. The big
drink it on the rocks, folks. Drink it on the rocks.
Little tea, little lemon, cures COVID. Boom. Then what else did I do? Oh, and then 8 years as the co-producer of the Chicago Independent Spirit Expo. And now for the last 6 years, I have been the North American brand representative for the Glencairn glass. Look at that.
Yeah, 4 for 4. All right.
Like wildfire. I'm sorry for that, folks, on the West Coast. And let's just hand it over to Lizard.
Thanks, Marty. Steve, thanks for joining us. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Liz Rhoades, technical distiller and spirit consultant. Have just over a decade of experience in alcoholic beverage, worked across a few different substitutes and products, including beer, rum, vodka, but my personal favorite expertise is whiskey. I spent most of my career at Diageo, but now I'm currently founder and principal at Spirit Safe Consulting. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Lou.
Thank you, Liz, Marty, Steve. My name is Lou Bryson. I am a whiskey writer. I spent 20 years as the managing editor at Whiskey Advocate. I'm back at freelance.me and have this book out, Whiskey Masterclass, just came out in February. Thank you. We'll talk, Steve. I'm also a senior drinks writer for the half full section of, tasting whiskey also. The half full section of the Daily Beast, which I am very pleased to announce just won the Tales of the Cocktail Award for Best Spirits publication this year.
Excellent.
So we're pretty pumped about that. And one last thing, today, some of you ask sometimes what I'm drinking. Today I'm drinking in honor of the late Justice Ginsburg, The Justice from Proof and Barrel, a Dave Schmier production. Pretty tasty stuff.
Dave, with Dave Schmier Productions, the quality goes in before the name goes on. Him and Zenith. Well, of course, today we have a very special guest, which is kind of a nice follow-up to Lisa Wicker that we had last week because they've done a lot of stuff together. But this is also kind of cool because it's probably our first American distillery that we'll be talking about today.
Really?
Yeah. That we're talking about. But it's one of the first American distilleries.
Duh.
Did you read about what's today? Oh my God!
As an editor, I would take your clarity to task, Marty, but I know you're having fun. So,
and he wrote a book. So today we're going to be talking to the man who basically oversees. He runs it. You're the historic director of the Mount Vernon Distillery at the George Washington. I don't know, estate. I don't know the term for his estate.
You could ask him.
Yeah, I can ask you. That'll be one of the first questions we get to. Steve Bashore, everybody. Stephen, could you give us just a quick little rundown, a little synopsis? What made you tick? What got you into this whole business, and what led you down?
Then what that whole business is?
Yeah.
Well, it really starts a long time ago getting a history degree.
Yeah,
because I come at it
closer.
So many moons ago.
I want to hear about this. I'm still trying to figure out how to make a living with one.
Yeah. Well, getting a history degree is like being a vow of poverty. So, I could thought I'd teach in the classroom, realized I couldn't do that pretty early on. And then I realized there was public history out there through various historic sites. So I got involved doing special events management at a small county park. And my office was in the 1820s miller's house of this historic mill they owned. So I would go down and talk to the mill staff, and I really kind of fell in love with the machinery, the water wheel. And a year later, they had a position open up on the mill staff. So I got that and started giving tours. And the guy that run the mill took a liking to me and said, "Do you want to learn how to run the mill?" And that's how it kind of started for me, through grain, the grinding of grain through traditional methods. So I ran that mill for 3 years, went to my second mill, another historic site in Virginia, ended up at Mount Vernon 14 years ago, right when they were completing the whiskey distillery reconstruction. So I really got in on the ground floor, knowing, a little bit about spirits, but that first year we opened, we had many major master distillers come work with us. Jimmy Russell, Eddie Russell, Dave Pickerel, Ron Call, Joe Dangler. So I got thrown into the deep end. And that first year I was like the gopher, go get the corn, go do this, And over the years, it's developed into quite, I think, a quality product through a variety of years of effort and consultation with great distillers. And I've been very fortunate, because really long ago, just running mills, I never knew that it would end up in this deeper level of spirits and spirits history.
Well, but that's amazing. I mean, that's a pretty cool introduction into the creation of whiskey, working with those guys. I mean, you're basically diving in at the deep end, and they're teaching you how to swim. I mean, that's pretty cool. But now, having said that, so you got these modern distillers. Some of what, first off, maybe you should explain what you guys do at the distillery, because it's not like anything else you've seen at most other distillery.
Yeah, really interested in learning more about, the process and kind of how you preserved some of those more.
Actually, I know, Liz, you were interested in this because you mentioned it in the notes that we make for the program. Could we start at the mill?
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the whole mill thing.
Yeah, and I'll weave a little bit into the basic history of what developed there in Washington's time. So in the 1760s, Washington's, like most Virginians, he's growing tobacco as a cash crop. Mm-hmm. But tobacco really is hard on the soil. So he's really seeing debt on the horizon because he can't compete in the tobacco market. His land's exhausted, which leads him to switch to grains, particularly wheat, as a cash crop. He built a merchant mill right there on one of his farms where the creek was, and built a mill pond. And that's the genesis of the industrial development of Mount Vernon. So from 1770 through the Revolution to later in life, he's really exporting flour, like a lot of American mills. And a lot of people don't realize that Americans' first real. Yeah.
I'm sorry. What you said, a merchant mill?
Merchant mill. The difference being there were thousands of mills in America, but most of them fed small communities. Or they might be the landowner's mill where local farmers would come get grain ground. A merchant mill is built to export flour.
Okay. So a bigger mill.
Baking, then that was the main.
That was the production of the staple for the food for the local farms or landowners or regional markets. But what Washington builds and taps into is an already existing export flour market that really began in the 1680s and 90s when the colonies up and down the eastern seaboard start to have a surplus of grain. So in addition to distilling, which we know went on from the earliest period, they also export cornmeal, bread, and flour. And the first real destination is the Caribbean, the West Indies. Those are sugar islands.
Yeah.
So the foodstuffs go down, rum, molasses, sugar. Sometimes slaves come back to the East Coast. And that's part of that triangular trade that went on. And so they're just trying to use up excess grain like a distiller would as well. But that market grows hugely in the 1700s to where we're exporting to Southern Europe, to Italy. Washington even shipped one shipment to Suriname. So the American flour really takes over a huge hold and becomes a great moneymaker for him. And the nice thing
reading about that, I just started reading. I'm sure you're familiar with Six Frigates, about the creation of the U.S. Navy, and the whole first part of it is essentially why we needed the frigates, which is because of this grain trade you were talking about. I was astonished at how much food we were exporting.
Wait, now were they exporting, Steve? Were they exporting ground flour, or were they exporting grain? So, but flour export. We were talking about this earlier in the pre-show about rats.
Spoilage.
And the problem.
I'm hoping that wasn't what you were going to say, but here we are.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if this it kind of goes to this topic, and that one of the reasons so many mills became distilleries is that you had and so many farms as well. It just made it easier to convert the grain into alcohol because alcohol was easier to cart off. It was easier for trade
mechanism,
and it didn't go bad because insects and rodents couldn't get at it. So how are they shipping this stuff off on ships, which are notorious for, back then those ships had rats all over them?
Well, two things they're doing. Number one is the way they sift the flour through the proper equipment. So that's what Washington had built, a way to sift through a large bolting chest that had silk on it. And they would watch their weather, because if you sift and package flour in humid conditions, it's not going to make it. The other thing is really excellent cooperage. And the Europeans were astonished that American flour not only made it, but was so higher quality than the European flour. And it broke into those markets. And so much so, it's a little aside, but in the 1820s, the Prussian government sent two young German millwrights to America on an espionage mission to figure out why our mills were so much better. And they worked in mills from New York all the way down to Virginia. Sometimes the millers would figure out what they were doing. Others kind of kicked them out when they figured it out. But they wrote a book.
Phone tree to notify.
Spread the word.
They're 001 and 002. Secret agents.
Well, they may have been Blofeld because, they were. But the long and the short of it, this book was published, and the Mill Society a few years ago translated the German text. Oh, wow. And it's an incredible treatise because there's tons of grain knowledge in there. Incredible grain knowledge. They knew how to condition wheat in the 1820s. And we don't think that they were doing that, getting moisture levels right before grinding. Because dry grain, airborne dust has lost profit. So that book has really told us millers a lot about that time period. But suffice it to say that our mills were just superior technology-wise. And the cooperage was so good, we were able to compete in that market. And some of the mills in Europe, because of guilds and tradition, did not always upgrade equipment, so they were behind the curve. But these German millwrights went back to Prussia and built American mills systems in those windmills and watermills, which is great for the Europeans because when you go over there, they tend to think, well, American stuff is young and cheap, and it's always nice to go to a windmill and say, that's an American component right there. And because I have many German and Dutch and English friends that are millers and mill experts, and you got to rub it in a little bit. But
sure, of course.
But the cooperage is also critical.
It's expected of us. It's expected of us when we go over there to.
I take the blows the other way too. Believe me, when I go. But that was what Washington tapped into, an existing flour market that was lucrative. And years later, what that means is when he hires this Scottish farm manager, James Anderson, It's right as Washington's retiring from the presidency. Anderson was from Inverkeithing, had been involved in milling, distilling, and exporting spirits to England. And he proposes a distillery to Washington. He says, you have this mill, all these crops, all this land, 8,000 acres of land Washington owned, 3,200 acres of crop. And he said that the distillery will complete your business plan, and I'm the guy that can build that for you. Mm-hmm. Now, Washington's pretty frugal with money. I don't want to use the word chintzy, but he was not a spendthrift. He watched his money. So it took convincing. So the first year distilling at Mount Vernon, they did in the cooperage, which was near the mill, and they put 2 stills in there. And they made the whiskey, which back then, as you all know, it was not aged. So it went right to market, which meant the cash came right back. And Washington was really pleased and agreed to build the larger distillery. So over the winter of 1797-98, they built this pretty big for its day, 75 by 33 foot distillery with 5 stills. Total gallon capacity.
He had a cooperage.
600. Yeah, he had a cooperage.
He had a cooperage and a mill, and then the distiller. The cooperage was for flour, or
it was for the flour barrels.
Okay.
But he also owned a commercial fishery on the Potomac, so the coopers moved back and forth. So he's an example of diversified portfolio pretty early.
Seriously.
But yeah, the distillery was the last piece of the puzzle for him. But if he hadn't hired Anderson, I always tell people on tour, I say, if he had not hired James Anderson, you would be in your car in the air conditioning having seen a really nice watermill, because the distillery would never have been built without the Scottish expertise. So with that, working in the distillery those last 2 years were 8 men, 6 enslaved workers between the age of 20 and 14, and 2 paid staff, one of which was James Anderson's son, John, who basically, I guess they would have called the master distiller at the time.
Yeah, James Anderson was roughly about 50 years old.
Right. He immigrated at 47. Yeah. And one of the reasons he left Scotland was the heavy taxes on spirits that were coming down at that time period. And a lot of the distilleries were being impacted real negatively in Scotland. And he decided it was time to go, because to immigrate with 7 kids and at 47 years of age is a big decision.
That's a step. Yeah.
Well, also too, now if you go to Mount Vernon, I don't know, for those of you who haven't been there, it's there's a distance. I mean, not a far distance; it's a little walking distance, but enough of a distance between the mill and the distillery that it seems a little just making it harder on everybody. A lot of sacks.
He was looking for a longer word.
Well, it seemed no, because it's more about the lugging of the bags of grain.
Well,
the flour, that it just seems like
the creek is there though, Marty. See, the creek, they built the mill pond and dammed it up at the upper end. The creek still flowed through the farm and went behind the back of the mill. So he had a small wharf there where they could load the flour barrels onto bateaus or flatboats, and that creek goes right out to the Potomac River, which was the artery to the Chesapeake Bay.
Well, no, but what about right to the distillery? I mean, you still need to bring that grain, grain into the distillery.
Yeah. And I mean, from the mill? I mean, we huff it up with a cart like they did back then. So for our process, we have this water mill that's got 2 sets of millstones, and we grind all the grain for the whiskey on a set of American granite stones. Our water wheel's wooden, the gears are wooden. And then we tote that around the back, pushing a cart like they did. Into the distillery it goes, and then we cook and ferment in 120-gallon wood barrels, mash tuns. And we use wooden mash rakes to row that mash. So that's the hardest part, really. Well, in the 18th century, wood fire, obviously, because of fire code, we have 5 wood-fired stills. So the fire marshal said one more giant fire under the boiler is probably not a good idea. So it's electrically heated today. And being a purist, when I first came to Mount Vernon, I thought, I hate that that's not a wood fire. Now, as a distiller, I'm so thankful because I have a panel in the electric room, and I could set my water temp at least so I can have an easier morning. But it gets scalding hot, and when you're in there, when we're setting, you can't see everybody. The haze, the steam is hanging throughout the room.
Oh, so you're doing just a single infusion mash. You're not cooking it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. The boiler is simply the vessel to heat the water, and then we bucket that water to individual fermenters.
Gotcha.
So just playing it back, so it's probably a good thing that the mill is so far away from the distillery from a safety perspective, right? So I'm only assuming that's what George Washington was thinking is safety first.
Well, possibly, probably profit first, but because
both are equally explosive, though. I mean, a mill would do to dust in the air. Everyone lights a match, light their big long pipe.
I don't know. Were there mill explosions?
Yeah, there were flour dust explosions. They're more rare than you think, but they did occur, and that's why you look at these mills. They have tons of windows. They may have a fireplace in the mill, but they do not run a fire when they're milling. So they worked in darker conditions. The distillery, has its own issues, as you guys know, because we have open flame and alcohol. So
that fine would not be a good scenario to have with those other two, flammable conditions.
No, that makes for a bad mix. Yeah. But our biggest worry in the distillery, other than fire, is the boiling water. All of us who've worked in there, I've had a couple of burns from it because we're lugging water in buckets or in long ladles.
Oh, wow.
And, and then we used to, when Dave Pickerel worked with us, we used to drain the slop from the still. It's got a valve in the back, and we fill buckets and carry them out to discard in other containers. And we now have a hose, so we have made allowances because I had a mash burn on my hand one year, and I had a glove on, but it sticks and you rip it off and you still got the wound. So I played baseball when I was younger. So my analogy for the way we do things is I was a catcher. So that's they used to call the gear, the instruments of ignorance you put on the catcher's gear because you're going to sit behind there and get hit with the ball. Well, that's kind of how we distill a little bit. But the whole purpose is to do it the old way because we're reflecting an era that's long gone, but would have been done that way for centuries. And those that come work there, that's one of all the distillers we've had that really enjoy how tactile it is, that you see it happening in front of you. You're mixing everything, right in front of you as you row mash or pour grain. And it gives you the elemental basis of distilling on a very real tactile level.
Now, when you say row mash, what do you mean by that?
Well, we have a wooden rake with slats in it. It's about 7 feet tall, made of white oak. And so I'm usually rowing a lot. So as the corn and water's coming in, you're mixing in that 120-gallon barrel, stirring that mash.
And do you row it? I mean, are you actually doing it like you're in a canoe?
Well, you got to anchor it against the edge of the mash tub and kind of slide down and turn that mash from below. So then you
whole protocol.
Just to row that mash. Yeah. So the first, 10 minutes, you're really rowing a lot as all the grain goes in, about 160 pounds of grain.
Is there like a caloric sort of connect it to your Fitbit or?
I wish. The way I've been eating lately, no. But it is a workout, though. It is a workout.
Steve, two things. One, Christina Wolf would like for you to write the name of the book you were talking about.
Yep, I can do that.
Either that or just spell it. You can just spell it out if you got it. But also, she has a second question. Back to the mills. How far did the grinding degree go at that time? Or what was the share for the whiskey production? I can hardly imagine that flour was used as for bread baking. What?
So I think she's talking about how fine the grind was for whiskey.
Yeah.
Is that
grind size?
Yeah, I think that's what she means. It's an interesting question because I go to a lot of distilleries and you'll see how rough that grind is, how they crack that grain open. And for our purposes, we grind it medium to medium fine. And that may be just because we have to row all that. It was something Dave outlined. I talked to Lisa Wicker about it, and she says that no one has a definitive on what's best. So we're just kind of doing it in a manner in which it's easier to row. But I have seen a lot of real rough grinds on, modern distilleries. In fact, we did single malt whiskey a few years ago, and I ripped that really rough. And I didn't even have a screen in the sifter. We just caught all of it, hull and all.
But you're stone ground. So, I mean, that's by principle pretty fine, particle size. Anyway, if you're comparing it to, other milling techniques, for example, hammer milling or even roller milling,
Mhm.
I actually got to do a study a few years ago that I presented at ADI, comparing grind profiles against roller versus hammer versus stone grind.
Oh,
I'd like to see that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
It's very interesting. But with the stone mill, I can adjust the millstone up or down, so I can control the fineness of it.
Yeah.
So there's a compound lever in our mill that allows me to raise or lower, and I can adjust the gap between the two stones.
Okay.
So I can set them the width of a nickel. That's how tight I can make it. And we ground just last week some heirloom grain for a baker, white Lamasse wheat, and I had that so fine it was beautiful. And he bakes in an 18th century style oven. So yeah, they definitely the advancement in baking and the ability to make fine flours back then was pretty far advanced.
So is that something that you're adjusting, that gap setting per cereal, for example, taking account different friabilities?
For the whiskey, it's all set in the same gap range.
Okay.
But we make grits, we make pancake flour, we make wheat flour, we make cornmeal. And so depending on the grain and what we're making, we'll set that gap. And it's a wooden geared mill, so it runs different in different weather. So you can't have a mark on your beam that says that's flour.
Oh my gosh.
You have to learn your mill, because sometimes you have more or less water. Sometimes it's hot and humid and the gears are sticking a little bit. Like right now, it's so nice. I ran it last week. It was running so smooth. So that's part of the fun of milling. Is,
yeah, the art of it.
And each mill I've ran had different controls. So
when you're talking about adjusting the gap, how are you turning the wheel? Are you setting pegs? How do you do that?
It's different in different mills.
I know we're getting way into the weeds here and far away from whiskey,
I knew this was going to be happening with mills with me. It always happens that I had somebody tell me, one time, it's just mill with you, isn't it? And it's kind of so.
Mill.
In our mill, in our mill in the 18th century, one of the main ways they did this was you have a fixed bottom stone and the gearing's below, and it drives a spindle that goes through the bottom stone, through a bearing. The top stone sits on a driver up top, and there's a long compound lever connected to two large beams. And when I pull the lever, it'll move those beams and lift the last gear, and the spindle on the top stone is one unit.
Wow.
So I've got great mechanical advantage.
Wow.
So like on the one side, the top stone weighs 2,700 pounds, but I can move that with one hand because of the long lever principle, the compound lever. And then you set it. It's got a leather strap with a bottle weight on it that holds it in whatever position I set it in. And what's neat is that bottle looks like a whiskey bottle. I've got one. Do you want to see an old one?
Yeah.
Can I step away from the screen for a second?
For that, sure.
We might not let you back on. It's really something,
it really does.
Oh, wow.
This came out of an old mill, and that leather strap ties to the big lever. So that is, and they called it the beam and bottle.
That's really cool.
What is it called?
The beam and bottle.
Beam and bottle. Okay.
And this was given to me by a friend, a mill friend, and he got it out of a very old broken down mill. And so I just got this last year, but it's just awesome. And so you just pull on this bottle, the leather straps onto the long lever, and you can adjust and set it anywhere you want.
So you pull on that thing to get it where you want, and then you just let it go?
It'll stay in that position.
Wow.
So I'll have to have you back out to the site, Lou. And
yeah, because I missed the mill when I was out.
Did you really?
Yeah, and I missed you last time you were. So.
It's not that far away.
It wasn't
a little bit walk, but it's.
I was on a tour with a bunch of people, and it was like, okay, back on the bus, get back on the bus. So one of those
citizen tours, Lou. They're no good. They always skip mills. Go ahead, Liz.
I had a question, and I know there's a number of questions that have come through, which is great. I just referring back to some of the protocols you guys have chosen to maybe change or modernize. What is that assessment like? what does that look like in terms of, here are these, if we're doing a gap assessment of pain points, what is the decision point of, oh, we definitely need to change that versus sticking with, the historic approach?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think it really grew over time, because initially when they distilled outside on that small still that Vendome made before the distillery was built, there's some funny stories that Dave Pickrell used to tell, and Joe Dangler, and even Jimmy Russell told me that Dave blew the onion off the still once. So even those experts who knew how to run all that they did, they had to play around with the mashing and with that to get those first bottles made. But once we went into the distillery, once we got inside, Dave was our first consultant. We would set the corn and the rye in, because it's a rye whiskey they made. And we had a lot of trouble with foaming early on.
Yes. Yeah.
Rye will foam. And so there was battles there with temperature and trying to figure out how best to not make that happen. But for a number of years, we had kind of settled into a routine where it was working for us, but we were having a lot of lactobacillus and other problems in there, because cleaning wood fermenters is a problem. And
you mentioned earlier when we were in the tech check about the cycle time and the time it takes to cool down before you can, pitch the yeast. And I was just playing that out from a distiller's perspective. Like that idle time is perfect time for bacteria to come and swoop in and pick up. So
yeah, well, we struggled with that, kind of doing it the old way for a few years. And then the real big change in our fermentation methods came when Lisa Wicker came to work with us, because I was in the unenviable position of being between two distillers as they were transitioning. So Dave had his ways, and we loved working with Dave. But Lisa came in when she was still at Starlight, and she noticed some stuff we could do different. And so we had a talk, and Dave at that time was kind of stepping away because he had so many projects ongoing. His time was tight, and Lisa came in at a perfect time, and she really cleaned up our fermentation methods. And the other thing we did add that's not period accurate, maybe in the 19th century, was we have small wort chillers now.
Okay.
Where we can control set times, and we can walk things down for the next step, so it's not just sitting there into the night.
Right.
And so now we can set all the grains in the first day, yeast it before we leave the building, and everything can be active. The other thing is how we clean the fermenters. We have an 18th century steam pressure washer that's very helpful to us, because we steam and we scrub them with soda ash, and we citric them and then roll these wood barrels back in. So she's really helped with cleanliness, making it right on our fermentations. And she rewrote the mash protocol for us. So we just have different hold times per a protocol she's developed over the years, which is very yields high, and it's improved how we operate. It's improved the quality, and we're making more whiskey, per run. So, but all of it was part of a progression of learning how to run that building, and in the water in the boiler, we even used to put pellet hops in there as an antibacterial. We just half a bag of pellet hops.
Yeah.
Now we have a filtration unit because it's water that comes in from the city, and we filter that before it goes in the boiler. So there are some modern things we do to achieve a better whiskey, but from that point, all the rowing and hauling and running fires is all period accurate.
Yeah.
Well, what were some of the things that they were doing back then that you thought were, one, obviously, some of the changes you were just talking about that kind of make things a little easier or
a little safer.
But were there other things that, we couldn't do this a million years.
Well, I think one of the things they may have been done, which I've read about, is they may have been with the boiler water, adding a certain amount of hot water and then bucketing in cold water to achieve temperature sets. Instead of having just to wait for things to cool down. Because we would have a number of distillers come in there, and everybody had a different way or different approach. And someone, I think it was Thomas McKenzie, first mentioned that to me some years ago, that you could get your temperature set. But the issue is, for us, we want to cook as hot as we can, in the 190s if we can. that corn and rye. The problem is by bucketing water as on your journey to the fermenter, you're already losing temp.
Yeah.
And then it's open while we add grain and we row. And so we take a temperature and it's already down in the 180s by the time I get all the grain in. And we'd like to hold it like 196. So part of it is just the building itself has limitations. And back in the 18th century, they had those limitations. And the thing is, like we talked about earlier, they didn't write everything down. They were slogging it out, making whiskey.
Yeah.
And it'd be neat to know. And sometimes in old texts, 18th century distilling guides, you can see some of the secrets written in there. Those are interesting to read. But I think like with historic milling, millers didn't write everything down. You kind of have to figure it out on your own. And we've been fortunate to have people like Dave and Lisa and Joe Dangler who worked for Sazerac, and A. Smith Bowman for years. He still helps us on occasion. So we've gotten good advice along the way on how to make things better.
You've mentioned a couple of just kind of tangentially about how weather affects the process. How do the seasons affect it? I mean,
well, I think everybody here knows that barometric pressure can affect a still. So, that happens in modern times. So we have days where that weather is going to affect how we feed the fires, how the stills are running. But also certain fermenters on the mash floor, there's a window at the back. Mm-hmm. Those always do different.
Yeah.
The two stills by the door, the main door, they're going to run different depending on what's going outside. And we've run it from times when it was 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which sucked, running wood fires, to time when we all come in and shovel snow just to get into the building and run it like that. So
that wood fire's pretty nice those days.
Yeah, you lean up against the fire brick and relax. But it affects us all the way, and then what we try to do is track a lot of variables. So we have a wonderful lady who's kind of our numbers guru who comes in, Andrea Boyce, and Andrea is retired CIA accountant. And we kid her that she really ran black ops, that she wasn't, but she's a numbers guru. So she's tracking all sorts of variables, including weather. And so over the years, we've got data points along the way that help us understand what's going on. Cool. The only problem is in a building like that, there's so many variables. Sometimes you can't nail down what may have affected it. Sometimes it might be the way we set, or that it was really cold that morning. It slowed everything down. Sometimes it's who's running the still. I've got a core of people that have gotten really good at it, but I always have new people, which we work in there to give them experience. And, as a manager, sometimes when you manage people, it's one of the hardest things. I'm sitting across the room going, what are they doing over there? Because they're having a conversation, and I know they haven't thrown wood in that fire in about 8 minutes. And I'm like, come on. But that can affect either too hot or, you don't want hot distillate. So I wish we could pin down the date because I think it'd help us get better. But I think we've really improved, frankly, with Lisa's help and guidance these last few years, and Andrea on all these data points, we can make adjustments now if we see things go in certain ways.
Yeah.
If you go to your website, and I've seen you in your garb, everyone dresses in period pieces, and I think we've talked about the locker room.
I don't remember that conversation.
Yeah, it was earlier. In fact, we talked about little creaky wooden lockers, and there was a old bucket shower system, just like they would have had in 1790.
Back in the day, yeah. Everybody washed a lot back then, I understand.
Oh, yeah. Just a little. But now, do you guys have to distill? I mean, when you are distilling, are you distilling in those period pieces? Because those things were never meant for. I mean, those things are layered, and they don't look comfortable, especially in hot weather. And then in a hot distillery, I imagine it's murder.
Well, we're not running a lot when it's hot. We're in tour mode in those days, so we really run March and November, and then occasionally in May or October. But the clothes are actually really comfortable, and we have linen we wear in summer, so it's not too hot. The only time when we're doing production, we usually aren't doing tours just because it's dangerous and we have to focus on our work. So the only time we're in period clothes then is if we have a film shoot, which happens from time to time. History Channel or someone else will want to film us. And I'll tell everybody you got to wear period clothes tomorrow, and they're already in their street clothes mode, and they're like, oh, and and we have to put away the plastic buckets we sometimes use and go back to wood, and so
like companies coming, like shovel everything.
Right.
it's sometimes like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I've been doing
I've been doing a faux brick wall. They just move out of the way, and there's all the modern
styrofoam. I've been doing the living history a long time, so you learn how to cover stuff up and hide things that don't need to be in the film shoot.
You have a couple of questions here, Stephen. How is the rum production done? Are you recreating distilling based on 18th century methods? I assume this is done with molasses. If so, what is your source, mister?
That was a special project we did in 2018 with Maggie Campbell helping us and Lisa Wicker. And the reason we did rum at Washington's Whiskey Distillery was because our fundraising office was going to republish Washington's Barbados diaries that he wrote when he was about 16. It was his only trip outside North America. He went with his older brother, Lawrence, and he got exposed to the rum culture, to sugar plantations, to the markets. And they said, can you guys make rum? And so I called Lisa and said, hey, need some advice and some help. And she said, let's call Maggie too. And it was a team effort. And Maggie put me onto a source that was from one mill in Central America, high-grade molasses, not blackstrap. And we brought that in. Our big dilemma was we did this in February, and it was 11 degrees in the building.
Oh, my God. Molasses in February.
And so we got them set with the hot water, and I called Lisa again because she was back working, we're doing her full-time job. And she's funny. She said, go to the pet store and buy all the aquarium heaters that you can. And so I hung aquarium heaters upside down the lid with a handle, hung them in all the fermenters. We used a champagne yeast and a rum yeast per Maggie's suggestion and Lisa's suggestion. But then we had to build, again, see, this seems non-period accurate, Marty. I can see your face, but
I don't think they had aquarium heaters.
This is so George Washington. This is so George Washington. Find a way to get it done. He would have been proud of it. So we hung plastic tarps around the whole mash floor, around the boiler, and created a tent, and we ran the boiler constantly.
Oh, my God.
And then we set up space heaters around the mash tuns and kept them rolling. One of us would stay to like 1 a.m, unplug everything. Next person came in at 6 to get everything back on, and we nursed those things through to completion. Wow. And then we just had to run the stills. So we were okay, running the fires. And
then you said we will never do rum again.
That's right. Yeah. I wrote our Joe Bondi, our development officer, and said, no, never again. But that rum is going to be released October 3rd. And it's Cascades rum. It's 28 months old in used bourbon casks. And it came out really beautifully. And in fact,
look at that.
Right.
Very nice.
Wow, that's great looking.
And the back label has a map of Barbados on it, which is kind of cool. So
that's cool.
Now, would you use those barrels, those rum barrels? Would you then turn around and maybe put some whiskey in them?
Or brandy? I'm not sure.
Yeah, you said you were going to be making brandy. What fruit?
We're going to be doing apple probably in November.
Okay.
Makes sense.
We will not likely do a whiskey run just because the way we set mash, staff have to be right on top of each other, next to each other. And with the brandy, we're able to handle that with less people. And so this is just a safety precaution with COVID going on. We don't want anybody to feel like, they have to come in there. It's an enclosed space too. There's not a lot of ventilation in there. And so we probably go with the apples. And we have an orchard that we work with in Maryland where this guy grows apples that Washington would have grown, like Roxbury russets.
Oh my!
Pippins, and so we try to err toward historical accuracy, while, as you asked, Liz, making it work so that we can improve the quality of our spirit. Because there's bottles from the early days that I would never pour at an event, and you can see the progress of how we've gone over time, and it's very nice to feel like we've really hit a stride here, and I think that from the recent mashes with Lisa that are so high quality on fermentation, that whiskey is yet to be released, except as an unaged whiskey.
Well,
So,
And then, are you doing that, or?
it's in. We always release unaged every year,
Okay.
and then we barrel the other portion. So we have also always been in small barrels over the years, 25-gallon number 3 char. We now have many 53s.
Okay.
They're laid down, and some of those will be 4 years old next spring. So I think the best whiskey that come out of George Washington Distillery is yet to be bottled. So we're really excited to bring that out.
Well, going back to what I asked earlier, with all these 20th century, 21st century distillers coming in to help you out, yet here you are dealing with 18th century technology and methods. Were they coming in and going, oh, it'll be no problem? Wait a minute, what's this?
That's a good question, because reminds me of a story when Dave was there once. We were doing a peach brandy project. We had a bunch of craft distillers in there, Ted Huber, a bunch of other people, really great people. And so we as staff and historians, we kind of stepped back a little, because it's like these guys are more expert than us. And they were arguing over what to do with this one still. And Dave did us a favor, because he walked over to the distillers and said, hey guys, look, you know how to run your stuff.
Yeah.
These folks know how to run these. Let them do their job. And then but we didn't want to step on any toes, but I was so thankful Dave spoke up for us. And then it became partnership. We showed them how we do the fires, and because running those fires properly is the other trick to making good whiskey that way, because you really have to know how to feed those fires properly, the right size wood and the placement of the wood under the fire, because if you feed it too much or you don't lay your fire out well, you'll have temperature spikes in the still, and you're going to have all sorts of huffing of the vapor coming out. You're not going to be able to really keep a straight run all for 3 or 4 or 5 hours. So
it's similar to, I guess, like a pit master, right? So it's the same principle. Wood management.
Wood management,
barbecue, yeah.
Because we've got no dials on there. We don't know. I mean,
I was wondering what you were talking about. When you said pit management, I thought, what? Are you talking like in mud wrestling?
No.
I got you now.
Mud wrestling.
Now,
rat wrestling. Rat wrestling.
Rat wrestling, right? Yeah.
they come from different backgrounds. That's all.
Get the terriers in there. Get the terriers.
Just to be clear, I have no expertise in mud wrestling.
Well, then luckily Marty does. So we're
that's right. This team, we can handle anything.
Yeah, you've seen that scene from Stripes with John Candy. Marty,
Put me in a pair of long johns, a mud pit, and an opponent.
Yeah.
There you go.
But
hey,
a bottle of Benedictine.
Speaking of the molasses, are you guys familiar with the whole molasses explosion in Boston back in 1920?
Yeah.
I always thought that was fascinating. I think that was during the summer, and the big tank of, tens of thousands of gallons of molasses exploded.
Was that for distilling?
I don't know if it was
for
for
making beans.
Might have been for beans and a number of other things, probably syrups. But I always thought it was funny that not funny, but kind of sad funny, that 35 people died. I'm thinking,
odd. We say odd.
Molasses.
Yeah.
Outrun molasses. I'm just thinking.
Well, that many gallons, so.
I would have eaten my way through. Okay. Here.
We have
question from Christine again. How often and at what temperature do you release the beer washing out from the wash? And
it is obviously building an 1800s or 1700s distillery of her own. And
she's doing it.
Is she Prussian? Is that what she's?
I was gonna go pay a couple $100 for a class, but I'll just get all the information here.
I'll have to send her the 18th century manual.
Like those the German espionage millers that we're talking about.
Yeah, Gansel and Wolf. Yeah,
She's their descendant. He's a descendant.
But,
How do you release? What temperature do you release the beer? Washing out from the wash, and do you save anything from the for the next wash?
we don't. It's all sweet mash. Everything goes in the still. We used to try to early on see if we could sift some of the solids out, but the way we work by hand, it was just there's no way.
Yeah.
So everything goes in the still, and we drain the stills that very day. We learned the hard way because one night early on we went home thinking it was, and we found 4 inches of cornbread baked on the bottom of the copper bottle, which was a lot of fun to clean out. And so we go ahead as the stills are dying down, we'll run hot water or water down in there, cool it a bit, and then open the valve with the hose on it and drain all 5 and then clean all 5 the night.
So you do have valves. You're not taking the heads off and.
Well, we do take the heads off. We let it cool a certain amount of time. And then if it's mash, we'll pull the heads because we got to get down in there.
Oh, okay.
If it's a spirit run, we'll leave them like that overnight, and it actually helps clean the still.
Oh.
So every so many days we'll do a spirit run, we'll double, and that also gets rid of water, consolidates what we have. And then in the morning, you just drain the water out.
See, so people have a good idea about this. One batch of whiskey, one run. I mean, how much time does it take?
About 35 straight days.
Yeah.
And
just the effort.
It's milling. It's about 11,000 pounds of grain to make a 30-day run. And if you think about, I didn't mention the number, but in 1799, Washington's distillery, those 8 men made 10,942 gallons of whiskey. And, we have deep respect for them, I'll tell you, because we do 30 some days and we're ready to stop.
Wow.
Because you start looking over and counting fermenters, near the middle, like how many of these damn things do I have left to run? And because it's just physically arduous. But over 2 years, they made 15,000 gallons of whiskey there, 1798 and 99. And it's pretty impressive.
And he was the #1 distiller at the time?
Can't say that. We got to remember there are thousands of distilleries back then. I mean, by 1815 in Maryland and Virginia, there was like 15,000 of them. So from all the research we did do that was available, there was one distillery in Virginia we found that had 6 stills. We had 5. But its biggest year was 8,000 gallons. So it's one of those things you'll never know. You'll never know like what was going in Scotland completely in 1720. All the records aren't there. So you have to always qualify if you're a good historian. You use phrases like, we believe that, because I don't want to say it was, because I have no way of proving it.
So Washington dies in, is it 99 or?
December 1799. And
Martha followed only about 3 years later.
1802. And in his will, Washington left the estate to 3 nephews because Martha's first husband, her children she had with Daniel Parke Custis, they had an inheritance already, so they don't get the Mount Vernon property. One of his nephews, Lawrence Lewis, gets the mill and distillery in that farm and runs it a few more years, but it's never as profitable with the farm separated. And Lewis isn't a very good manager. And then there was some falling out with the Andersons that happened. So around 1804, you lose your Scottish expertise, which probably isn't good for a distillery. And it went downhill from there, and then it burned down in 1814.
Oh,
wow.
So it was really archaeology, 6 years of archaeology, and then fundraising through the Distilled Spirits Council, who helped us raise the money. Peter Cressy was the president then, and brought the distillery back. And actually, I was talking to Peter the other day, because he works at our library now, the National Library for the Study of George Washington. And next year is the 25th anniversary of that first group of distillers coming to Mount Vernon and talking about the project and doing some of the initial PR. So we may try to do something special next year and release something, down the road to commemorate.
Cool.
So how did they, I mean, I could see digging up the foundation. You find the foundation of both the distillery and the mill, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mill. So how do you figure out everything else? Were there there weren't any blueprints. Were there any plans? How they
No.
figure out how everything was?
Old photographs.
Old
Yeah,
photograph.
they did. They went to the old.
Really
Yeah.
old.
Washington had one manila folder behind his desk that had all these great photos that they were able to tap into.
Were they Polaroids? That's an old camera.
They were Polaroids. Yeah, the very first. Yeah, you know. But
Martha,
on the
everybody
soil
still.
samples, they found burnt.
Oh,
They found
really?
burnt soils where the fires were under the still.
Nice.
They also found the brick remains of the fireboxes of the stills were there. The mash floor was intact, the cobblestone floor. They found
Oh, wow.
drains that led away from worm tubs that carried out to one single drain that went back to the creek. They also found a floor drain near the boiler. They found the well out back.
Wow.
And the boiler pad. So there were so many features there, and we also have the ledgers and the letters between Washington and Anderson. So there's written descriptions to go with great archaeology. And what's fascinating is when you work at a museum like Mount Vernon, there's a lot of different departments. And I didn't know till 2 years ago that one of the preservation guys told me, oh yeah, those are original cobblestones. We put those back. So we've been rowing mash all these years on the original cobblestone floor. And I thought it was all replacement, you know. So I was like, I geeked out over that. I was like, that's
pretty
incredible.
cool.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
But it was all really the great team of research and archaeology with Dennis Pogue led that up, who was head of preservation then, and Esther White, who was our longtime archaeologist. They're no longer at Mount Vernon, but they did tons of great work on that project and on the mill. And that's the neatest thing about it, I think, whether you come when we're actually making something, which is rare because tours aren't always offered. Then we sometimes do a VIP tour for people during distilling, extra fee. But to step back in time and see a working water mill in conjunction with another industrial building is a rare opportunity. In Europe, you often see sites where they have dual industry going on because they have just retained more of their older mills. But in America, it's one of the unique spots to come see a distilling operation of the 18th century and learn about it. So, and I think all the distilleries, as I said early on, being a miller, I'm partial, but all those early distilleries had to have a milling partner, a mill nearby, or they were in conjunction. And if you see blueprints of the early 19th century, sometimes you see the mill adjacent to the distillery. And it was a complex of buildings, not just a standalone.
Well, and also too, if Anderson had a Scottish distilling background, he might have been obviously influenced by what he knew.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could look at very old Scottish distilleries and kind of get an idea of the layout and kind of juxtaposed it to the floor plan.
Well, he definitely laid out the building because there's written evidence to that effect. And it's interesting. Anderson was very smart. Him and Washington got on pretty well, but there's funny letters where sometimes they disagreed, and Washington would always ask questions, because that was his way. And Anderson got a little mad one time in this letter, and I love how Washington responded. He said, "You're asking me to ask about that which not ask about that which I own." And Anderson's reply is very apologetic. He knew he stepped in it,
Well, George was really tall for the time too.
He was 6'3". Yeah, he was 6'3", big guy. But at this point, he's 67, so Anderson could probably take him. But the point being is Washington, for a guy who never had an education above about 7th grade, read and studied and educated himself to the level, if you read his letters compared to his letters in 1750 to 1780s and 90s, you see this very educated man with an ability with language. It's quite impressive. And sometimes you find funny stuff too. There was a miller he had who wouldn't really follow instructions, and Washington, in his first term, the farm manager's telling Washington of the problem in these letters. And I found this wonderful letter where Washington writes to the farm manager, and of the miller, he says, "He will regret the days he spent basking in the sunshine of my mill." And I laughed out loud, but I mean, he meant it, He meant it. He expected people to work hard. He expected people to do their job. Not everybody does, but Washington's a special case for that. I don't know how he got done all that he did in his time, but certainly without his management of Mount Vernon and and of course all the paid staff, the indentured servants, and the enslaved population that lived and worked that land that made it profitable. It wouldn't have all happened. It took everybody to get that place to work.
How many slaves, how many indentured slaves would he have working at both the distillery and the mill?
Yeah, there's 6 of the young men in the distillery. That's like
only those 6
at the distillery. Just at that site. Overall, there's 316 enslaved workers at Mount Vernon in 1799. At the mill and distillery, you've got the 6 young men that are working in the distillery, and there's a miller named Ben who was enslaved that worked the gristmill, and he was highly skilled. Washington even mentioned him in a letter that he knew the milling business very well. So you had anywhere from 50 to 60 skilled enslaved workers. There were brick masons, carpenters, millers, coopers, other trades, and then of course those folks that worked the land and tilled the crops and took care of that part of the farm.
And they were the slaves were all freed upon Washington's death. So I wonder if any of those guys, did they stay working at the distillery and the mill, or did they go on? And it would have been interesting to know if
it's a little more complex. It's a little more complex than that, because there's actually 2 groups of enslaved workers at Mount Vernon. One were the Washington slaves that he had inherited, then owned, and bought, over time. And then you had the dower slaves that came from Martha's first husband's estate. So she brought a number of folks with her from that first marriage that lived at Mount Vernon. So sadly, when the will's executed, legally the Washingtons at that time could only free the slaves that George Washington owned, which was 123 people. The others remained in servitude because they were part of that estate, and some went to the other Custis lands in different parts of Virginia. We don't know the story of everyone that lived and worked at Mount Vernon that was enslaved. The few families we do know of, there's some interesting stories that come about. In fact, one of the families, the Quander family, their name has stayed in the area. They've lived in the area. And about 5 or 6 years ago, the head of Mount Vernon Inn, the dining room, was a direct descendant of the Quanders. Jay Quander is his name. He's a restaurateur. So he ran our restaurant for a number of years. And it's, you look at your history and the bad and the struggle and the hard things that happened. And then it's nice to have a story where you see the full circle come around, and that man running our restaurant, great guy. He works in Alexandria, Virginia now, runs another restaurant, but it's a complex story of the interaction of people through time. And we try to do our best to tell the story of everybody that lived and worked there, because part of our job is to bring all that to life through various means. And I'm lucky with the mill and distillery and the farm doing the living history that we get to do, is we get to highlight the lives and work of a lot of people that otherwise would not be known in various aspects to history for what they contributed on that land.
Well, you have other people. Last time I was there, was that a year ago? Who was the young woman you had? She was in the distillery, but she was, I don't know, was she sewing sacks or something? I thought.
Yeah, I think it was Catherine. So we have, an active textile program where we do actually spin and weave, recreating the businesses that were done internally at Mount Vernon. Up in the original spinning house, we have a 1730s loom that's operated regularly by a group of my staff. I'm not the textile guy. I don't know how to do that. But I have a big team of people. Historic trades at Mount Vernon is not me. It's about 20 people, an eclectic bunch of really good, talented folks. And I've got my head miller, Corey, who's outstanding. We've got blacksmiths that make items that are period accurate. In fact, they completed making a Rotherham plow, which is a 1760s era plow. It's completely period accurate in collaboration with Colonial Williamsburg that we're going to use on the farm next year. So we try to be as accurate as possible, except for, certain shortcuts we talked about. Sometimes we use the wort chillers. Sometimes we do have to, we do filter the whiskey, we do things like that. But our goal for the visitor is to have the most accurate experience they can have and learn as much as they can about the past. Yeah. Go right ahead. Sorry. I'm filibustering, Lou.
That's okay. That's all right. I just wondered, you mentioned Williamsburg. I just wondered, my brother-in-law is the executive director of research there, Carl Childs. I don't know if you ever came across him.
No, I haven't met him. I'd love to meet him. Gosh,
Yeah,
that's great.
There was actually a period, I guess, like late last year and early this year, where somebody had left and they hadn't hired the replacement yet, where he was essentially interim in charge of your kind of stuff, and he wound up in Lancaster commissioning a coach from some Amish wheelwrights and was purchasing livestock. It was a fun year for him. Really busy, but
they have a great program there still. I mean, we're friends because of what we do with a lot of the tradesmen at Williamsburg. So
yeah,
the troopers, the wheelwrights, and the farm team, and they've made items for us over the years. So it's if you come to Virginia, come to Mount Vernon, but go to Williamsburg. It's so well worth it, you know. But great people, and the research arm there is impeccable. You know, it's been impeccable for decades, and we go to them a lot. You know, we go to them a lot for various things. And of course, Frank Clark, who does the food waste program, he does their brewing down there too.
Yeah.
So Frank,
I went
Frank's
to that.
excellent.
What the hell was that? Ale of the Ages.
Mm-hmm. Ale of the Ages.
Yeah, I went to that the first year. That was great.
Yeah. So
did you just say Ale of the Ages?
Ale.
Oh, ale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was some great man named Al. He's of the Ages.
It was the Al Bundy Festival there.
We're all the Al Bundys of the world.
So
it's kind of like the Elvis thing. They all show up and they're funny.
I like that.
Speaking of visiting, I think there should be maybe a link below that you can click to visit the website. I'm not sure if we'll put that up, but you're just opening back up, or?
Well, we're opening the mill and distillery now for weekends. So we started that in September on Labor Day. So just Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And it'll just be the first 3 weekends in October that will be open. But on Saturdays in October, we've done this in September too. We've done tastings for the first time outside the distillery. So September's all sold out. But if you look at the website and you live locally or in the area, you can get, for an additional fee, come out and taste some of the spirits we make, including the rum, which will be launched in early October. It'll be on the table there, so you can, and I'll be there with one of my team, talking about how we make it.
I'll be expecting my commemorative bottle to be sent to me, of course.
Yes.
Of George.
Horseback delivery.
Yes,
Right.
I want it done just as it would have been in 1799. So it might take.
It'll get there in 2028. So.
Yeah.
And I think just John Atkins had a question earlier on as well about the spirits available at Mount Vernon. So it sounds like
yes, they are.
So go and visit and get some of these liquids.
Yeah, they're at Mount Vernon shops, but we also are in about 12 Virginia ABC stores from Central Virginia through Williamsburg, Charlottesville, and Richmond. We didn't want to compete with ourselves in Northern Virginia. But that's a new thing we did this last year. And you can, if you live in Virginia, you can order these spirits online now and it'll be shipped to you. The Virginia legislature changed that law during COVID. So a lot of the craft distilleries are able to ship within the state of Virginia.
Nice.
So we hope for better things, right, Lou, as we move ahead with other states. And
I hope it stays in place.
Yes, sir. I hope
we
so.
realize that it doesn't cause chaos in the streets.
I know. Well, you got cut off in PA there for a while.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Shut down the liquor stores.
Yeah, that's a good move.
Which is why I live near Jersey.
Which is funny because in other states, there was a lot of complaints that here in Illinois, Michigan, liquor stores were open, but nothing else could open. Everyone's going, well, wait a minute, liquor stores are essential, and
You can get snacks too. They sell.
That's what I was thinking.
Those are the essential.
Liz, that's what I was thinking. How can you not have some Fritos or something?
Yeah, or Andy Cap fries. You got to have.
Well, you know what Mark said. Opium is the opiate of the masses. That's why you got to have your liquor stores open.
Also, Justin Owens. I'm sorry I brought up the molasses. Justin Owens is from Thrasher's Rum in D.C. He says molasses is no joke. I spilled 1 gallon in our distillery, and it did not want to move. So,
Yeah.
It's slow.
I
also-
replied back with my worst experience was when I got blackstrap in my hair. So that was.
Oh my God.
No. Oh, wow.
Gum, worse than gum. That's like a car.
So there was a new haircut for you then.
There was some careful decision making.
Liz's hair used to be like Crystal Gale's. It used to go down to the floor. Yeah, all cut off below the shoulders. Also,
we're dating ourselves with all these jokes on Liz. You know, all these references to people. Liz is going, what the hell is Marty talking about?
I know. I feel like Dennis Miller sometime. I'm just. Christina, as it turns out, Christina says sorry. She's the one who is asking all the questions,
Technical questions.
because she's starting up her own distillery. She says, "Sorry, I'm German." So and I just and I know how the Scots are doing it. So she wanted to get all the details, the German details.
We can get there. Sorry, I wasn't as didn't cover all of it about that question.
No, that's all right. We never do. That's this show. We very rarely cover everything.
Always leave them wanting more.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of things I want to let you and the viewers know is coming down the pike is
please.
We did make bourbon in November 2018.
Ooh.
And I found in the farm reports from 1797, they didn't have enough rye and they were using corn and wheat tailings from the mill. And there's also a letter to Washington from Anderson, as well as the report describes this. So we made a wheated bourbon mash bill.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
And I got 70% white corn from Kentucky, 20% Virginia soft red winter wheat, May wheat, and the rest malted barley. And that's not even 2 years old yet, but down the road, we're going to let it age a good long time, but there will be a George Washington bourbon come out at some point down the road.
Cool.
And again, that was the great help of Lisa Wicker in writing out that fermentation on that bourbon. So, and those are all in 53s, so we're just going to let it ride for a good long time.
Nice.
Cool.
So when you come back, we can certainly do a little barrel tasting there, Lou, and John and Liz, you're invited. So let me know when things are better, and we'd love to have you back and hang out a little bit.
I forgot you were calling me by my stage name, John.
Good John Adams.
I occasionally read. I did see your name, yeah. Could have been Al.
Could have been Al.
Oh, me, Al. So, one of the things, though, I forgot where I read this, but at the Washington household, when they had parties, they loved punch, and they were making it. They would make it from new make rye. So they weren't using a lot of aged spirits. If I'm correct.
Well, also rum punch was big. Rum punches were big, more than a whiskey punch. Yeah.
Would you guys ever, I don't know, when you do have events there, do you ever serve like kind of a recreation of what they would have been making?
That's been done before with the Martha Washington's Cherry Bounce, the rum punch.
Cherry Bounce?
Don't knock Cherry Bounce, brother.
Well, the cherry in the Washington family. The chopping down the cherry tree, Cherry Bounce. Was it her kind of needling George for cutting down that tree when he was a kid?
Perhaps.
Martha's Revenge.
Yeah. There's a rum name. That would be a good rum name.
I like it, though. Cherry Bounce, really. Yeah. But did bounce mean something else, or were they saying...
I'm pretty sure that's a Pennsylvania Dutch thing. Because we still made that when I was a kid in Lancaster. It's just whiskey and cherries and sugar. You stick it in a bottle.
Really? But so bounce, though, does that just mean I'm giving it?
It's BAUNZ. I'm not sure I'm not sure what it actually means in Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah, and I'm not sure either where it comes from. But,
anyway, we should wrap up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, God.
Overtime. I think we went overtime, but it's great talking to you guys.
Great show, Steve. Really good show.
Really enjoyed chatting with you.
Nice talking to you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went too far down the mill road, but that's my nature.
No, we dragged you.
Yeah.
We threw you in the carriage and took off with the horses. That's it.
Now you just keep your ear to the millstone.
Oh my God.
Hopefully not my ear.
So
The daily grind.
Yeah.
Got a million of them.
gotta cut them off.
Who do we have next week, Liz?
Well, now we have to grind to a halt.
Oh my
So-
God.
I like it.
Yeah, but thank you guys. I really enjoyed being with you.
No,
That was great, Steve.
Quickly,
Make sure you
there's
go
a link.
to Mount Vernon. Yes.
There's a link for our guest next week. So we have on Frank McCarty. So be sure to tune in with us next week for that.
From Springbank and formerly a Bushmill.
Scotsman.
Big time. That's good. Irish, Scottish kind of talk.
Well,
All
thank
right.
We'll
you
see you
again.
next week.
Thanks,
Steve,
everyone.
thanks again.
Good. Bryson,
Bye-bye.
look at
That's
that.
right. That's right. Good book.
Oh my
And the
God.
glass.
Oh my God. Over 9 hours of reading if you read real slow. All right.
And the bottle.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
See you next week.